Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you again, Gisborg. I would like to use my time today to highlight three issues, three learning barriers which our research, taking boys seriously, which looks to better understand and address the low attainment and low levels of higher education participation amongst boys, particularly working class boys. So I want to talk about three learning barriers which our research shows have a detrimental impact on the educational performance of boys. I'll then briefly outline some effective approaches, some successful interventions from our research in terms of addressing these learning impediments. We believe that addressing the long-standing issue of male underperformance in education is contingent on a fuller understanding of these learning barriers and a sector-wide commitment to address them. The first learning barrier that our research identified was motivation. And there's two really key findings here. Firstly, that many boys, not all boys, many boys establish their own self-esteem through social interaction, not academic performance, often because there's a cost associated with achieving, and that cost can include alienation from class peers who are non-achievers. And secondly, and crucially, it is really difficult for some boys to be motivated in a particular subject unless they can explicitly see its value and its future utility. In other words, boys need to see a tangible connection between the school curriculum and their own life's experiences and their own career aspirations. One of our pilot post-primary schools have embraced a whole school commitment to increasing levels of motivation amongst their boys by developing relational learning and pastoral care strategies which encourage boys to value education and, crucially, make these boys feel good about their academic progress. And other initiatives, such as inviting tradesmen into the schools to talk to boys about the absolute imperative of, for example, GCSE English and Maths in terms of, for example, securing a trade apprenticeship. Indeed, as recounted by one of the principals, a tradesman visited their school and addressed the boys and told the boys, much to the initial consternation of the teaching staff, how much he hated maths and found it utterly pointless, until he realised that he needed it to fulfil his ambition to become an electrician. Now, this principal went on to say that there was a large section of boys for whom this talk was transformational in terms of their attitudinal change around the subject of maths. Because this tradesman was able to say, you know, I hated maths as much as you do, but I needed it, so I put up with it and I did it. Okay? So the second learning barrier we identified was boys falling behind in school, feeling that they can't catch up, very quickly becoming despondent and then just giving up altogether. Now, in many cases, this falling behind is a consequence of literacy and numeracy skills deficits carried forward from primary school and simply not attended to early enough in post-primary school. This downward spiral, as it were, is a very common dynamic, particularly amongst working class boys, and it highlights three critical issues. Firstly, the need for early detection systems in terms of any learning barriers these boys face. Secondly, the value of effective and individually tailored interventions to address these barriers. And thirdly, the importance of programs or initiatives which can help such boys develop and sustain higher levels of resilience, bounce back ability in terms of their educational development. In another of our pilot schools, the leadership have adopted some key recommendations around improved communications between feeder primary schools to ensure that early learning issues are detected and resolved before they become deep-seated and intractable. Better supported transitions from primary to post-primary education. One-to-one mentoring for year 8 boys, that's their first year in secondary school. And the adoption of pedagogies which can help boys become more resilient to allow them to mediate any bumps in the road of their educational journey. We're also looking at community-based interventions, one of which is the Box Clever project in Monkstown, just outside Belfast. This project engages with year 11 school refusers. So the most hard to reach boys, the most disengaged boys. Now, these boys attend the boxing club 2 days per week and receive life skills training and one-to-one support from specially trained youth workers around subjects identified by their schools as areas for improvement. Now, the deal, as it were, is that they must attend school on the other 3 days and not get into any trouble while they're there. The results have been frankly spectacular. And these boys routinely exit the project with 5 GCSEs or equivalents, and are then supported to apply for and commence post-school opportunities such as technical college. Now, just on the issue very quickly of this falling behind, I think it's worth making the point here that in the context of lost schooling due to the COVID pandemic, we all need to be very careful with our language around pupils who have fallen behind and who now need to catch up. This narrative is wholly dispiriting for many young people and could actually engender or actually hasten their disengagement from education. The third learning barrier we identified was the sometimes fractious, sometimes non-existent relationship between boys, particularly those who've disengaged from education, and their teachers. Our research has shown that the quality of relationships between boys and their teacher is a strong predictor of eventual attainment. Now, I spoke earlier about relational learning strategies and how our pilot schools have made a real effort in this area. In the past year, our research has devised a series of relational learning principles which are now being road tested in our pilot schools. These principles are based on proven youth work methodologies and include commitments to, for example, communicate persistent care, display an attitude of acceptance and affirmation, and to engage boys in their learning by linking subjects to their everyday lives. In our early data around the impact of these relational learning principles, one school leader has highlighted a step change in pupil-teacher relationships in his school and spoke about these relationships having determined the extent to which boys engage with lessons and heavily influenced their expectations of their own academic performance. The principal then went on to posit the need to prioritise the cultivation of teacher-pupil relationships as part of teacher training and professional development. To briefly summarise, the problem in male underperformance in education calls for a solution-focused response, one which designs and embraces educational policies, methodologies and pedagogies which can motivate boys, detect and address any learning issues as early as possible, and engender positive pupil-teacher relationships. However, and to close, the long-standing correlation between poverty and low attainment is undeniable. The poorest pupils have the lowest attainment. In 2003, the House of Commons Education and Select Committee noted that it was inarguable that poverty is the biggest single indicator of low educational achievement. And it's very difficult to make the case that the situation has improved in the intervening 18 years. Put frankly, the condition of poverty causes young people and their families to deprioritise and become fatalistic about education. In other words, in the absence of a determined effort to address child poverty in the United Kingdom, any interventions, any approaches, any attempts to address the low attainment boys, particularly working class boys, are seriously undermined. Thank you all for your time, and I'd happily answer any questions you may have.